Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the asking questions mental exercise, which is useful for kick-starting a new phase in your life, asking the questions you didn't know you need answering, and also to some extent gathering your thoughts regarding to a specific problem, although it's more general and exploratory a mental exercise. The idea is you go for 40 minutes and you ask yourself, or you ask yourself 100 questions just back to back to back, no filtering. The goal is to just completely remove your filter, and you're not worried about grammar. You're not trying to answer the questions. You're just going. And the idea is one question tends to lead to another and another. And the first 20 or so questions are just kind of your normal sort of brain daydreaming type questions. But then you start getting into deeper layers, like kind of peeling back an onion. And the questions provoke more questions, and by not worrying about answering the questions, you sort of get yourself into a state where you can kind of get on a roll and just get into a sort of curious element. And I think it's useful to kind of just talk about mental exercises a little bit in general when talking about this, which is there's a metaphor that an author, Matthew Crawford, uses in his book, The World Beyond Your Head, and he talks about mechanical jigs. And he's a motorcycle mechanic, and this makes sense, and I'm not a mechanic, so to some extent I don't understand the jig so well. But the idea is a jig is a device used to maintain mechanically correct position relationship between a piece of work and the tool or parts of work during an assembly. So an example of a jig here we have is you have a sort of device that is meant for keeping the workpiece still so you can drill into it perfectly. And then I don't know the names of all these things, but the idea is it structures sort of the work that's being done. And you can think of mental exercise as a sort of structured mental introspection. So you just have your kind of normal mental introspection, which is like daydreaming or whatever, but in this, you're kind of trying to structure it. And the structure for this mental exercise is just asking questions. And you're not worried about answering them. You're not worried about going on down like a tangent or trying to think of stuff. And we have an example, but let's talk a little bit more about sort of where this mental exercise came from. This is the procedure. You just go and you ask questions for 40 minutes or 100 questions. Now, I first encountered this as an official mental exercise in How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci, which is the book here. In it, he argues that there's like 7 different types of elements that made Leonardo da Vinci a great thinker. One of them's curiosity, except it's curiosity in Italian. It's like curiosità or something like this. And the idea is you just sit down, you ask yourself 100 questions, and he argues that this is kind of, an essential practice for thinking like Leonardo da Vinci is to just unlock your curiosity, and this is a method by which you can do it. He then advocates, highlighting the 10 most important questions and calling these the power questions. I've seen this power questions kind of mental exercise, before in Anthony Robbins' book, Awaken the Giant Within. This is sort of going on in the highlight the 10 most resonant questions, but Anthony Robbins' power questions, this is a sort of different mental exercise, is he has morning power questions and evening power questions. The idea is you ask your morning ones in the morning and the evening ones in the evening, and I think this is just kind of a useful kind of thing to look at in terms of where you're going with this asking questions bit, or where you can go. What am I happy about in my life right now? What am I excited about in my life right now? What am I proud about in my life right now? What am I grateful? What am I enjoying? What am I committed to? Who do I love? Who loves me? And then in the evening, what have I given today? What did I learn today? How has today added to the quality of my life, or how I can use as an investment to the future? Now, when we're thinking back on jigs, this is kind of like, we're thinking this is a mechanical jig, right? It holds the work in place so that you can get with precision the exact thing you want done. This is a sort of mental jig, where it is kind of holding your mind in place. You are committed to doing this in the evening, or in the morning and the evening, let's say, and it is holding your sort of attention in a sort of directed way, because as you read through this, you provoke the question, and it kind of leans on one of the essential elements of mental exercise, which is priming. When you think about the question, you have to invoke all the sort of background ideas. There's like this famous study that's like, okay, the study is a little, was maybe poorly conducted because it wasn't double blind, but the idea was people had to solve enneagrams of, they just had to solve word puzzles, and some of them had words that were related to being older, and some of them just had neutral words. And what they found in the hallway after the study, the people primed with the older words, would walk slower down the hallway. The idea is, if you think about something, it tends to, manifest in terms of your actions and this sort of thing. And so when you are priming yourself in the morning about being happy, excited, proud, grateful, enjoying, committed, loving, and being loved, you will tend to manifest these more. And I don't like the word manifest because it's not very technical, and it's a little bit more wishy-washy, and I think a lot of this stuff having to do with manifesting, but you're going to pay more attention to these things is perhaps a better way of putting it. And paying attention to it is going to make it seem like it is more present in your life, although I would not argue that it manifests. Now back to the questions as a mental exercise. The point of this is less the priming and more the uncovering. And I think that what you do is, again, the first 20 minutes or so, let's see, Michael Gelb, I think that's his name, in Thinking Like Leonardo da Vinci, he advocates for just asking 100 questions. I have found it's not really the questions that are important, but how long you are in asking questions. And the reason I found this out was I did the 100 questions, but I would space it out throughout the day, not a profound effect. But if you sit down and you ask yourself questions for 40 minutes, sometimes you go down rabbit holes and you start asking questions that you didn't know you wanted answered. And so I think this is just what a little mock-up I did as an example. I only went to 33, but we're just going to go through it really quick to kind of illustrate the idea of asking questions, because it's really just a very, very simple mental exercise, which is one of the reasons I like it so much, is because it's this very simple tool that I think is really powerful, just for approaching like a new situation where you don't know what you're supposed to think about something, and you don't know how you need to apply yourself to the situation, which is often, oftentimes you apply yourself to a life endeavor and then you realize you were just in the complete wrong direction, or the way you were looking at it was wrong, and it's wasted effort. And so this mental exercise, or any brainstorming mental exercise, is kind of, you're trying to avoid that. Okay. So first question, why am I asking questions? What type of distinctions am I hoping to find? What categorically are the different types of distinctions I might find? So this already is an example of, if you're looking at the world a particular way, well, then you can ask yourself, well, why am I looking at it this way? Should I look at it a different way? Should I evaluate differently? And I tried to capture these a little bit in the example. What about the classic mental, physical, spiritual, relational? These, if you look at a lot of self-help books, they'll you're trying to improve your life in these categories. But do you need to have these categories? Could you have different categories for looking at your life? And would different categories be better? How am I doing mentally, physically, spiritually, relationally? And these are questions asking, how am I doing? How could I improve? What do I view as progress in these areas? Should I view that as progress in these areas? When you don't have to answer the question, you relieve yourself of the cognitive load of responsibility to that. And that is kind of the mental jig of the answering questions, mental exercise, is you don't have to, the asking questions. I think I said answering. But that is the mental jig, is you don't have to, since you don't have to answer anything, and you're also not worried about, filtering yourself at all, it creates a situation where you can kind of try and explore, your mind and what you think a little bit for new distinctions. Okay. What about different forms of distinctions? There we go. How am I doing as a subject? What does it mean to be a subject? How does it facilitate my agency? How does it act in accordance with my values? What do I value? I think this is probably the biggest question that people don't ask themselves, is what do I think is important? Why do I think it's important? What does it mean to satisfy that value? How can I satisfy that value? These types of questions are often ones that go unasked. And then how am I doing as an object? So here we're taking a look at making the classic distinctions: physical, mental, spiritual, relational. And then here's a different one. What does it mean to be a subject and an object? And these are different categories through which you can evaluate something. And when you shift gears to different distinctions or different models of the world, it changes a lot. And often we get blinded into our own models of reality, and asking questions is a good way out of this. how might my presentation to others inform my identity vis-a-vis the looking glass self? This is kind of, just real quick, the looking glass self is kind of this model of identity where you construct your identity based on how people look at you. And so what it argues is like, how we're different with our parents than with our friends. They argue that it's not the case that we're just acting differently, but that we have a very, in itself, a different identity based on how others are perceiving us or what we think others are perceiving us, which has big ramifications in terms of, how you're going to move through the world and interact. But that's kind of like a tangent here, like not related to the questions at hand. It is the looking glass self, but this is kind of the essence of, the asking questions mental exercise is you get to go down tangents, weird tangents that you didn't even know that you were curious about. And you get to ask a bunch of questions, and then you get to go back through the questions and say, this is interesting. And then maybe you try and more specifically tackle the problem, which is kind of, how it helps you gather your thoughts related to a specific problem, is it just kind of unlocks all these corridors you can look down in a more, in a different sort of brainstorming type of way. Okay. Is a subject-object good form of looking at distinctions? Again, asking ourselves, should we look at the world this way? We can. Should we? What is my identity? Am I being authentic? Am I being authentic when I'm trying to change my identity? This is a question I've asked myself a lot because, a lot of people, this is a little bit of a tangent, but, when you are trying to change yourself, it creates this odd situation where to be authentic is to be yourself. And when you are trying to change yourself, is that authentic or is that necessarily inauthentic? And how do you look at it differently? And the conclusion I've come to is if the change is consistent with your values, it is authentic. And if it's not, it's inauthentic. But that's kind of a separate question, as it were. Does making changes that are consistent with my value mean authenticity? Again, this is kind of going, who is your daddy and what does he do? This often comes up, who is your daddy and what does he do? This is like a line in an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. I forget which movie. I remember it from being a soundboard. I often ask myself this question when doing the mental exercise question. Again, we're not trying to filter ourselves at all. And so this pops up in a lot of my questions, just a little bit of silliness, but the silliness is okay. And this is like, you're not trying to get a finished, refined product. You're just trying to do this rough draft or just exploratory thing in your mind. You're not trying to put anything down on paper that's permanent or necessarily a reflection of you. It's really important not to filter. How do I incorporate novelty into my life more? This has to do with Gregory Burns' not satisfaction. Here it is. How can I be more aware of the satisfaction model? This was made by Gregory Burns. He argues that novelty plus challenge equals satisfaction, and so you should challenge yourself more and also look for novelty. And he kind of couches this, he's a neurobiologist, in the idea that novelty is dopamine and challenge is cortisol, and you need to spike both in order to get satisfied. Kind of an interesting model, but again, we're kind of looking at, we're taking the glasses through which we experience reality, we put them on, and we always forget that we're looking through these glasses that filter reality a specific way. And when we ask questions, we get to take them off and look at them, and sort of see and think about how we're looking at reality in a way that we critically often don't do. And we won't do at the start of this asking questions bit. It's really important that you go for 40 minutes or 100 questions. I found 40 minutes is a kind of the sweet spot, where you get a lot of the work done, and then at 50 and 60 minutes, it tends to start to fall off. This is how it works for me. But just thinking about it in terms of maybe the first time you do it, go for 100 questions, see how you feel, see if maybe a bunch of your questions, 60 to 80, are really the exploratory ones that you find interesting, and then it falls off. This is my experience. And if you're still cranking out really good at 90, 100, then keep going, right? And if you're still going good at 40 minutes, keep going. Okay. What distinctions have I made today? How can I check in with myself better for more important things? So this is now we're looking at okay, well, what processes can we use? And this is not necessarily what your questions have to look up. These are just what my questions look like. What am I grateful for? How do I make myself more aware of the frame/lenses through which I'm interpreting reality? Again, some of this action. Okay. So, this doesn't necessarily have to be what anyone else's questions look like, nor should it. This is just kind of where I go with sort of things, especially with the understanding, like, kind of couched in the idea that I'm thinking about these from the perspective of questions as a mental exercise. So this has kind of informed all of my questions, and I didn't get really deep into sort of the more exploratory ones. Also, I was trying to avoid personal questions. But hopefully it serves as an example of, how one question kind of tends to provoke another, and provoke another, and provoke another. And often when we're just like daydreaming about something or just thinking about something, we kind of just focus on the surface, like 5 questions or 5 ideas, and we don't kind of provoke and use a chain. And the chain of all these questions, putting them down to paper, forces us to articulate them. And this forced articulation is a form of jig, as it were. It's a mental jig. It's structured mental introspection, with the idea that we are trying to, explore curiously, through our mind what we think about something. Or, perhaps more broadly, what we should think about. This is, these meta-level considerations are often, again, we are blind to them often. And this question, this asking questions is really good for provoking it, which is why I think it's good for, like, when you are entering a new phase in life, or asking the questions you didn't know you needed answering. But a drawback of this as a mental exercise, in my opinion, is it takes a long time to do. You just need to sit down and, like, go through it, and it doesn't offer any prescriptions. It just offers exploration. And I think this is useful, but it's useful in a particular way. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I think this is the first recording I've done for mental exercises. I have a little bit of a hard time sitting down and recording these because I really want to get them right. And to some degree, I don't think I can get anything perfect the first try out. And so this is a little bit of perfectionism coming in. I could ask myself questions about perfectionism in this regard. This is something I think about a lot. But we're going to leave it here for now. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Also, in terms of discussion, if anyone tries this out, let me know how it goes, because I'm always looking for more data points. Unfortunately, like with a lot of, any type of self-help type of thing, what ends up happening is they offer up, this is the 100 questions mental exercise, and it's going to get XYZ results, and it's not, there's not necessarily a high fidelity to, how do I want to put this? There's not a high fidelity to data, often in self-help, and so getting more data points of how this went, especially if it goes bad, I think would be helpful to me. I find this exercise tremendously useful, informative, and just fantastic, but you might not find it useful, and it's useful for me to know either way. So YouTube algo stuff, and then as far as discussion goes, if you did this mental exercise, feel free to let me know. If you didn't do it, and you have an opinion on it, I guess feel free to let me know, but I'm not gonna think too terribly highly of the opinion unless you've done it, because for me it was very profound the first time I did this, where the first 40 or so questions I was like, this is stupid, why am I doing this? Which of course satisfies, it is a question. But then once I started into 60 and 80, like these types of ranges, I was like, oh, I understand, I get it now. Yeah, have a good day.